2, hallo. Hello, welcome everybody to this last lecture in this running season. I'm very glad to welcome you because this is the first lecture which is organized by the Dossier International Affairs, and it's close connected to one point of interest which moves us very much, and it's concerned with the question, how is the staff to be part of international activities, especially activities which are more than short-term workshops or encounters. We are talking about strategic partnerships, and as you all know, the Zurich University of the Arts just begun to initiate different spots where strategic spots outside Switzerland are of main interest. And this will be the topic of this evening, and I'm very glad that we got Edward Ziter from the New York University to come here. He is a real person who is in globalized education, because he just arrived here this morning and he will be heading back to New York City tomorrow morning. So he just came here to give us an impression of his experiences with one mega organization which deals worldwide. That's the New York University. This lecture will be mainly be a lecture by Edward Ziter, concerned with the branch Abu Dhabi, especially building up the drama program in Abu Dhabi. That's something he did. After that, we will have a panel with some people from the Zurich University and a guest from the Swiss Technical University, who's also dealing with questions of globalizing education. So I hope everybody will be interested in what we are talking about tonight, and I hand the word over to Sabine, who will introduce Edward Ziter. Thank you.
Good evening. I would very much like to introduce Edward Ziter. Maybe you would like to come up. He's the chair of the Department for Drama at NYU, and he's a specialist in Arab theater, and he just finished his new book. It's about Syrian political theater from the June War to the uprising in Arab Spring, and it will come out in October. I just have to at Palgrave Macmillan. And we will be very happy to have a look at it. And he told me all about the research and the work has been doing for it, which has been over years, I think. So it's a very exciting moment for him. As Hartmut said, he was building up as a bridge faculty the campus in Abu Dhabi, the theater program, but he also, in other away sites from NYU, he also built up or consulted them in London, Berlin, and, for example, Sydney. So he's really working a lot for NYU Global, and I'm very happy that he will share his knowledge and experiences with us tonight. Thank you.
So I first just wanted to say that I've been well, first, thank you so much for having me, and I regret that I'm not able to spend more time here, but as the end of the year, as you know, the end of the year is very rushed and hairy time. I also wanted to say that while I'm, have had the opportunity and the privilege to be involved in the development of the theater program at Abu Dhabi, and as chair of drama, I'm very much involved in our development in other sites, that it is, there are many, many hands involved in these procedures. In fact, I think NYU likes to boast that there are 106 different faculty members who are involved in the different site-specific advisory committees. So again, there are many architects involved in this project, and I'm going to be talking specifically about this project and how it is that the mission statement, the structure, and the thinking that distinguishes what NYU is undertaking from traditional study abroad programs. Because in the past, you know, study abroad programs have really been driven by particular curricular needs or particular faculty connections. You know, we have a language program. We want an immersion program for our students. We want them the opportunity to study literature. We have contacts with this faculty. We develop a site. And that particular program stays very much linked to a series of pedagogical objectives and is dependent upon a series of faculty relationships. And that's typically how away programs develop. NYU has really departed from this model and has tried to constitute what it understands to be not a kind of hub and spoke model, but really a network where both students and faculty can move throughout the global network university without being locked to a particular site. And in fact, in recent years, students have graduated who have spent more than half of their time at the university at these away sites. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure, what the curricular and pedagogical goals are for imagining such a university, what that means in particular for arts education, because my department in particular is very wedded to an understanding of a highly structured, highly scaffolded training, which poses serious challenges but also opportunities if you're going to engage this global network. And I want to talk very briefly about what it means for the faculty, what new responsibilities but also opportunities emerge from this different type of structure. So I'm going to just briefly, NYU currently has some 14 sites that students can go to. 3 of these sites are called portals. Those are sites where students enroll. They start their education there. They could spend the majority of their time there. So obviously, the most important of the portals is the campus at Washington Square, New York University in New York. The second largest portal is Abu Dhabi, which is projected to grow to 2,000 students. And the third is the campus in Shanghai, which is being developed. So in addition to these 3 portals, there are an additional 11 away sites. The number will grow to 16. And the idea is that students will circulate between portals and away sites. You cannot begin your education in an away site, nor could you really spend more than a year at an away site, whereas in the portals, one could spend most of their time. The NYU Abu Dhabi portal site requires that students spend at least 3 of their semesters abroad in the other sites, and Shanghai will require that all of their students spend at least 2 semesters at other sites, and the NYU New York site would be considered one of the away sites if your portal, your point of entry is Abu Dhabi. But there's no limit on the number of sites that you can attend. So that's the general description. So let me get a little into this. So the first thing to note is that this model of education prioritizes or emphasizes flows. It is about the circulation of students and faculty through the network. Not only the students and faculty, but the research should be conducted between sites and should allow for different researchers to collaborate across the network and to travel throughout the network. So it's important that there be scholarships and funding for these kinds of curricular flows. You want the curriculums to represent what is distinctive about the site, but since the student needs to be able to progress through their education, there needs to be careful coordination between the sites. if I begin an economics class at NYU and there's a sequence that is anticipated, and I'm interested in going to Shanghai because that's one of the sites that is anticipated will be strongest in business and economics, there needs to be some correlation between that. Similarly, the faculty of the NYU economics department at the Square needs to be able to recognize and approve of the work that is being done in Shanghai if it's going to be part of their sequence of training. So circulation implies tremendous collaboration and feedback between the different sites. It's also equally important, though, if it be a network, that there not be a center and a periphery balance of power set up. So while the faculty at New York University in New York have there are systems put in place to give them tremendous oversight of the curriculum that is being developed at the away sites, there is a hope that it will always evolve as a kind of conversation between partners. So this is the idea is that all of this research, along with the faculty and students who do this research, will flow between the world's idea capitals, redefining higher education scholarship and global citizenship and leadership. So I would just add to that it really has become the case that the ability to move is very much a marker of elite status in our country and in the world. That to be defined as local is in some ways, is often a marker of deprivation. And that is a kind of radical shift in how economic structures are functioning, which is taking place irregardless of whether or not the university wishes to engage it. And so in thinking about global citizenship, there is this idea, the university is trying to embrace the idea, is that if in fact the ability to travel, the ability to flow across these networks is going to be the preserve of the elites, how is it that that capacity can be one that is structured around a sense of responsibility to the entire network? How can one both be mobile but also retain a sense of responsibility to the local? And so there's also in the mission of this new global network a desire to produce a new system of ethical responsibility that comes out of the structures of globalization. So while the university is very much a part of forces of globalization, forces that have had terrible impacts on many of the people who remain against their wills or are doggedly local, the structure also tries to imagine creating an elite that understands itself to be cosmopolitan. And cosmopolitan here is very much an understanding of oneself as a citizen of the world. That network is to facilitate a sense of responsibility, not simply to an elite culture or to those who can flow through the network, but everything that makes that network, that sustains that network. So it is a community of scholars, teachers, and artists and researchers who have direct access to 14 global sites throughout the world that provide new opportunities for research and future employment for students. So the idea, and I just want to emphasize this, opportunities for research and employment for future students is about connecting those individuals who have the privilege of traveling this network with practices in the host countries. So internships are about getting people out into the field. I'll give you one example. At the Ghana site, which is a site that emphasizes world health and economic development, all of the students have to do public service. Many of them are involved in the delivery of health care or in education. So these internships are not simply about forging future business opportunities. Ideally, they will also be opportunities to forge connections to the host country and to the people of that country. this will necessarily suggest new pedagogical opportunities. So if I'm running related classes in multiple sites because I have a responsibility to make sure that students can move towards their degree requirements and still travel this network, that creates opportunities to coordinate classes with an internet component, an online component. So we've already begun to do things where a class like The University Meets the City is hosted in multiple sites simultaneously, and students then have research and writing assignments that put them in communication with students at other sites. And the faculty don't teach the identical course at each site, but they structure the course so as to be in conversation with the course that's taking place at the other site. As the network grows in numbers and strength, and as the connections between the faculty within the network grow, the hope is that new approaches to teaching will develop, approaches that draw upon the strength of the network and fulfill the mandate for creating research that flows seamlessly throughout the network. So what are these sites? The portals are New York, Abu Dhabi, and Shanghai. The Shanghai is in a temporary building now, but the permanent building is expected to be ready in the fall. And then the away sites include Abu Dhabi. So if I'm in New York, Abu Dhabi is one of my away sites, then I can attend. It's both a portal and an away site. The away sites are Abu Dhabi, Accra, Berlin, Buenos Aires, Florence, London, Madrid, New York, Paris, Prague, Shanghai, Sydney, Tel Aviv, and Washington, D.C. And there are discussions of other sites, but the question really becomes, what can the network sustain? So it's no longer simply a question of, I'm a faculty member, I want to make, I want this opportunity for my 5 students or 10 students. Those kinds of opportunities are still available to the departments to develop, but those kinds of opportunities are not going to be part of this network, because the network needs to be open to the entire network. A site in the network is not for my acting students who are doing X project. If I want an acting program that is part of the Berlin site, I can do that, but there I'm collaborating with all of the other departments that have expressed an interest in developing coursework and programming at that site. The other thing I would say about these sites is these are all previous away sites or study abroad sites that had been developed by, for the most part, in departments. So the first 2, away programs that NYU offered was one in Paris and one in Madrid for the Spanish program and for Spanish and Portuguese and for French, and they were essentially language and literature programs. And then as the administration, and to be perfectly clear, this was a project that was devised by university administrators, not by the faculty. As the administrators began to think through these sites, not as individual sites, but as part of a network, Madrid became not simply the Spanish department's project, but became home to several different programs. So, for example, now, at this point, 1/3 of the students in the Madrid program are from the business school. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is, why the business school would identify Madrid as an important site for their program, and how these partnerships and affiliations are structured. So, what is the infrastructure? To engage departments and schools more directly in global academic planning and to share the local and distinct expertise of faculty at each of the sites, NYU developed 2 levels of relationship that an academic unit can have with a global site. So the first one is partnership. And obviously, if I started the site right? If I'm in Spanish and Portuguese, and the Madrid program is a program we developed, we are first among those partners. But other schools, other departments, given the opportunity, might find, determine that in fact there's a great deal of academic programming that they could deliver at that site that would really benefit their students. So in the case of, let me just grab that, to speak specifically of the Madrid program, since I led with that. I spent a year at the Madrid program. That's why it pops to mind. The Madrid program is currently being run by a site director, not from the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, but from the Institute of Fine Art. And that is because the Institute of Fine Art and we have, at NYU, we both have the Institute of Fine Art and the Art History Department. They are connected but distinct because the Institute of Fine Art is really training curators, whereas the History of Art program offers an undergraduate degree. The Institute of Fine Arts identified Madrid as a central site for the training of their students. And so when it came time to look for a site director from the faculty, this particular individual came to the fore. So Madrid, of course, the Spanish and Portuguese department is at the leadership of running that program, but sociology is also one of its partners, and the Steinhardt School of Education is also studying there. Stern sends a lot of students there as well. Stern, I'll just say, is involved, Stern, I'm sorry, is the business school. And the business school is involved in a great many of these programs, in part because they've developed a kind of global degree that has students doing, I forgot I just went off notes, but they essentially have their students doing half of their training at NYU and half of their training at specific sites because of a particular understanding of the challenges of future business leaders that has people moving through these different sites. If a department doesn't want to commit to a partnership, we also have academic affiliations. So a department or school can plan to offer a class at a particular site, and that can be an occasion to grant that department an affiliation. At present, there are 86 academic partnerships and 105 affiliations. So the school, at least, again, the departments, at the very least at the administrative level, has very much engaged this project. Now, each class at these away sites is sponsored by a department at NYU and Washington Square. And whether or not that will continue to be the case, it certainly needs to be the case now, because the vast majority of the expertise, some 80%, 90% of the faculty are at New York City. And so in order to sponsor a class, so we are interested, for example, my department is interested in developing an acting program in Berlin. As a prelude to that, we spoke to the site director about offering theater history. So when the site director identified an instructor, that instructor sent the syllabus to my department, and the curriculum committee of my department vetted it, requested changes, examined the woman's CV, and we then approved it. Now, it's essential that we approve it because at the end of the day, will decide, departments at New York will decide whether or not their students get departmental credit for that class. If a site offers tons of classes in acting and the Department of Drama says, I'm sorry, we're not going to allow our students to take those classes, or they can take those classes, but it will count as elective credit, then the structure really doesn't hold together. So sponsorship, on one hand, by sponsoring classes, departments are able to retain a certain amount of curricular control of what's happening in the sites, away sites, recognizing that their students are the principal audience for these classes. But it also allows us, those individuals in the New York campus with expertise, to share that expertise with the sites to ensure that the network grows in a way that is consistent with the ideals and standards of the university. In addition, there are site-specific advisory committees that provide feedback and oversight for each of the different sites. And these include the site director, faculty from the site, as well as faculty from the different participating departments at NYU in New York City. So, the architecture. The first thing to note is that New York City, NYU, never had a single campus. The university dates back to 1831, but what is now New York University is actually a combination of multiple schools that are in different parts of the city. And in fact, just a year ago, Brooklyn Polytech, the engineering school, became part of NYU. And so we now have space, as you can see, yeah, it's easier for me to use the cursor, in Brooklyn as well. Not just the engineering school, I would add, but the gaming program as well. The Tisch School of the Arts collaborates with the Courant School of Mathematics and Computer Science, and we've developed a computer gaming program, and it's housed at the Brooklyn campus. But NYU has always been in and of the city. We've never been a gated campus separate from the city, as you know, our friends at Columbia are, or the vast majority of American universities. We've always been interspersed within the city. And so at New York, we have essentially 6 different centers where the different institutes are. The Institute of Fine Arts, which I mentioned just a minute ago, is uptown, close to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where they have a relationship. The School of Continuing and Professional Education is in Midtown. It is a institution that attracts executives by and large, people who are continuing their education. What we often think of, the undergraduate college is clustered around Washington Square, but we also offer classes down closer to the Battery, and as I mentioned before, the medical school is, of course, centered around the New York Medical Center, the hospital, which is at 31st Street, and we're now expanding into Brooklyn. So the idea of coordinating an education that is dispersed is old hat to this institution. And so the transformation really has been from, as John Sexton likes to say, from having been a university that is in and of the city to one that is in and of the world. The NYU, the campus in Abu Dhabi, up until the fall, occupies 932,000 square feet in the downtown campus in a temporary building, as well as a Center for Science and Engineering, elaborate research and research labs that really are superior to what we have in the States, because everything's brand new, as well as Sama Tower. Here you hear Sama Tower. This is the downtown campus. This is actually a representation of what's going to happen at Saadiyat Island. So in the fall, we will, just this last spring, the first class, graduating class, had their commencement at the new campus, which will be on Saadiyat Island. This is, if you read the New York Times, you've learned quite a bit about labor practices at Saadiyat Island, and no doubt I'm happy to talk about that more during the Q&A. But this is a massive campus that is designed for 2,000 students, which the university projects will be the optimum size for that program. It will be both undergraduate and graduate. And I was involved in the creation of the Arts Center, and I have to say that the proscenium theater is going to be absolutely gorgeous. They're going to have these trucks are going to be able to travel underneath the campus for load-in, so that the load-in can be directly into elevators that will rise up immediately to the stage. It has 100-foot fly space, ample wing space, and in addition to this, really beautiful black box theaters and different lighting labs for designers, and it's just going to, the riches are just astounding. The question becomes, what's going to go up in there? And who are the audiences for these spaces? And that goes to what I hope we'll talk about a little bit later, which is some of the challenges that are facing the faculty that are developing this program. Because it's not just about developing a program, it's about developing a relationship to the city at large. I mean, arts does not have the luxury of completing a forum, completing an elaborate formula and saying, I've done my work, I'm done. It's not important whether or not there be an audience of people for that formula for it to be successful. By this fall, we should be occupying the new space in Shanghai. That academic building is going to be 550,000 square feet. And classrooms will have interactive video conferencing connected to other classrooms at the NYU campus and around the world. Now, the Shanghai portal will be, unlike the Abu Dhabi portal, which really has just a small percentage of Gulf students and is really an international campus with 50 different countries represented at the campus. NYU Shanghai will be 50% mainland nationals, with students from New York and other countries as well. And whereas the NYU Abu Dhabi campus really aspires to be a broad-based liberal arts education with training across the humanities, sciences, and the arts, NYU Shanghai will have principal focus in East Asian studies and business. Having said that, there's already tremendous desire for interactive telecommunication programming, and so these are programs that we're scrambling to get up and running. There are film faculty who are already there because of the interest in film. And I have been told that I should get ready for the interest in theater. We used to run a program with William Sun, who is the dean of a arts school in Shanghai. William Sun developed a training in Kunhua and Beijing opera for production of Western canonical plays. So most recently, he had a production of Hedda Gabler done as Beijing opera style, which was in New York just last year. And so we're exploring the possibility. We did a few years back, we did a program with him that just kind of petered out because of a lack of support. But we're starting conversations with him about possibly developing a theater program there. So again, even though I say, oh, the stated focus is going to be business and East Asian studies, if experience is any guide, students will also flock to arts classes. And I should emphasize that this is something distinctive to the American university system, because the American universities allow students and encourage students to double major, and also encourage students to take minors. So the experience in Abu Dhabi the expectation was that the theater program would develop very slowly. And in fact, it took off immediately, and they had many more majors than they ever anticipated, though a majority of those majors were double majoring in engineering or other things that would please their parents. And the administrators I speak to speculate that the same will happen at Shanghai, and that we should be prepared. We should, if we choose, we should see that there will be an opportunity for curricular development if we think that there is a curriculum that can serve our students and that makes sense for the location. I don't think it makes sense for us to offer Meisner training in Shanghai, but I think it would be very exciting to think about a training in Kunqua that was particularly geared for students that move between different repertories. Now I'm just gonna, so NYU touts that it has long been a very much international university. So the first group of numbers represents the numbers of students who are in abroad programs for credit. Now, what's interesting about this number is that the 4,378, is that doesn't include students at NYU, Abu Dhabi, or Shanghai. These are old numbers. So that number is really just going to jump in the coming years. And then the number of institutions hosting international students. We have, as of last year, we had almost 10,000 students from foreign nations. The hope or the expectation is that by creating these portals in close to Southeast Asia, in Asia, we're going to see that number rise even greater. Also, the hope is that we will have even more success at attracting a truly globalized faculty. If a faculty member knows that they can spend every fourth year in their home country teaching, if they can have these kinds of relationships, the university feels that they will be more successful in attracting faculty from around the world, in much the same way that they think that they will be able to continue to grow their international student population through a rigorous network that includes portals overseas from the United States perspective. In the course of time that the network has been developed, NYU likes to tout that its ranking in these different college ranking systems has really grown. So in 2010, 2011, the Times Higher Education ranking listed us 60, and we're now up to 40. Had ranked us 35 within the U.S. and at 24. I don't need to run through these, but you can see that the point that the university, which obviously provided me with these statistics, is that that this project is compatible with academic excellence. All right, so I want to use just the last 5 minutes of my talk to talk a little bit about what this has meant to faculty. Well, the first thing, actually, before I do that, the one thing that didn't come up in the slides that I think is important to note is the university has made a real commitment to make the network available to all of its students. So it doesn't want to reproduce the distinction between the elites and locals, that only the elites travel and the locals are forever, and that those short on resources are forever local. They don't want to reproduce that within the university culture. At NYU, it's got a tremendously high sticker price, and so it is a university like most universities in the United States, where you have students who come from real need, and you have students who are fabulously wealthy. So NYU has made a commitment to making sure that all of your financial aid travels with you. So if you have X need and it's being filled so that you can attend university at New York, you will not encounter any additional need when you go abroad. In addition to that, the they have made scholarship money available up to $4,000 per student who needs to apply for travel stipends. So the cost of the plane ticket should not prevent you
from traveling within the network. Yes, so meets the same level of age. Yeah, so I'm sorry. So, oh, and then the last thing I just wanted to mention is that any student who's on financial aid at any American institution has to fill out a FAFSA report, a family, essentially they have to report, the family has to report their their income as reported on their federal taxes every year. So there's no additional paperwork that a student needs to complete in order to pursue these kinds of opportunities. The university, and this is new to us, we used to require that the students go through the whole financial aid application process again. Starting this year, the university will simply rely on the numbers that the student submits as part of their normal financial aid practice. Sorry. All right, I'm going to close with some thoughts about what it means to be an acting program in a global network university. The Department of Drama, which I chair, has 1,400 students. And those students are, for the most part, they are in acting studios, doing 18 or more hours of actor training on top of their liberal arts education. We also have to teach directors and designers and production managers. But in all of these disciplines, there is a strong sense that the education needs to be sequential. If you're doing Meisner training, you start with repetitions in the first year. There's a certain point in the training where you progress to scene work. You're only available to do rehearsal projects at the end of the second year. Only in the third year are you working with elaborate props and settings. And this is a system that's developed over years and has become very codified. At the same time, though, all training evolves. So our Meisner training studio recently hired a professor who is trained primarily in Suzuki movements. And so we have, if you know Meisner, you know that there's a specific movement training program called Williamson that was designed to complement the Meisner training. So we have a Williamson teacher and a Suzuki teacher who have been collaborating to develop a distinctive training for our students. So, you know, these kind of collaborations are intensely productive of new ways of thinking about the disciplines and teaching. But even within that, it's highly scaffolded. The students get a certain number of hours in their freshman year. There's a balance of Suzuki to Meisner, which slowly changes over the 3 years. How then, my faculty has been forced to ask itself, how then would we engage a global network university? Do we want to think about our training in a more modular system? Does it make sense? Can we imagine students breaking off from this sequence to spend a semester doing, acting for the camera in Sydney, or Kunqua training in Beijing, in Shanghai? There's a lot of interest in an India site, which would also be an interesting place, for actor training as well. How then can we integrate that? Well, to a certain extent, the training already is segmented in ways that we really weren't aware of. And that's the first thing I would encourage you to think about, is just how sequential is it, and are there obvious points of intermission? For us, it's really after the second year, because we've already given the students the opportunity to change training methods after the second year. When you're training such large numbers of students, we found it absolutely necessary to house them in distinctive studios with their own methodology. We're not going to train 1,400 students in one methodology. There aren't enough teachers, and it would just become like a factory were that the case. There'd be no conversation between the different faculties. So we have a Meisner studio in which that accepts a group of 32 students and sees them through the progression. Now, because we have different studios, it created opportunities for students to change their training mid-path, and we set the second year as the site at which they could exit a studio and start in a transfer track at another studio or switch into a track that really begins at the third year. We didn't really want anyone doing film and TV work in the first 2 years, so we created a studio for film and television in the third year. So after the second, there's a kind of necessity that at the second year, regardless of how you imagine the trajectory, that that you have moved the students to a point after 2 years where you could imagine them changing methods. All right? So there are already some obvious points for us where we could imagine people leaving and coming back. The real question that we have to now ask ourselves is that the only point? Most students at NYU go abroad in their sophomore year, not in their junior year. Can we imagine a training where people could leave off after their first year? Should we consider, as some departments have done, a course of study which is premised on the idea of circulating through the network? There is an entire school at NYU called the Global Liberal Studies, which is structured around students traveling through the network. That is their education. They chart it out with advisors, there's particular courses of study, but they don't come in as they don't name themselves as economic majors or history majors. They are students of global culture. And the program is designed for them so that they can flow freely through this network. Could one imagine, for example, an actor who was trained in multiple methodologies at different sites, but never studying for more than a year in a given methodology? What would be the dangers of pursuing that? These are the kinds of questions or the kinds of conversations we're currently having. I hope that those are the kinds of questions we can engage in the conversation afterwards, which I guess should start now since I'm at 35 minutes. Thank you.
So, thanks a lot for your impressive presentation. Now I would like to introduce the persons on the podium. It's a pleasure to have Jörg Brunschweiler here. He's head of Global ETH, Swiss Technical University, which has a different approach concerning globalization and international engagements. We will hear about that later. Sabine Abeke, she introduced Ted Ziter. She is head of the directing classes in the bachelor program Theater. And since a couple of years, very active in building up sustainable collaboration with the New York University, the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and to European universities. The project is called Building Bridges. And she's here because she has experiences with one away site of New York University in Florence, where we were invited last year to have the last section of the first cycle of our Building Bridges project. And last but not least, Michael Krohn. He's head of the Master Design program and very much active in sketching a big project in China, in Shenzhen. It's going to be a graduate school for design. And he's also representing a different approach concerning globalization of education. So this is the team which is sitting here. I would like to address a question to each of you first, so we get a little bit more to know about your special topics. Jörg, perhaps we can start with you. I read that the activities of the Swiss Technical University is very much interested in the specific interests of researchers and teachers, and these personal interests are kind of basis for your global strategy. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that.
Indeed, I would say that, I mean, that was a very interesting presentation. Of course, we at ETH Zurich know what's going on at NYU, at many other universities, major universities. What you, Hartmut, just alluded to is you said that we have a different strategy. Indeed, I think we follow a really bottom-up approach. So we first, in a nutshell, I mean, this is I guess different from NYU in some sense. Is we ask faculty, what do you want to do? And if they say, I want to do this and that in that particular location, we let them go, basically. We would not go to faculty and tell them, now we build this, or let somebody else build this campus in Abu Dhabi or so, and now you have to go there and do the research. I mean, this is in a nutshell. We have one. It's a project. It's not an offshore campus, but we have ETH Singapore, which is not, you know, that's not a degree. You can't do degree. What essentially is, it's a research project initiated by the architects. What we have been doing as ETH in Singapore in the past few years is it's essentially called the Future Cities Laboratory. So we know there's when you look at the world today, there will be and increasingly the population will move to cities. You know, this is related to food production and everything, waste and building materials. And the architect said that, and this is happening not in Europe and not in the US or in Canada, the big cities of the future will be around the equator, basically in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America and South America. And with very specific questions that need to be addressed by fundamental research. And to give one concrete example from Singapore is, for example, building with bamboo. Bamboo is not, you know, we don't have bamboo here in Switzerland, but we have plenty of bamboo in Singapore and other places in Africa, for example. So some faculty from ETH are actually developing new building materials from bamboo concrete, basically, to build the future cities in those areas. So it's actually research that, you know, can only be done in a meaningful way, in an effective way in those locations. It's a different climate, very different cultural setting, but it also, the result of this research is actually used or are used mainly in those areas as well. So it's I mean, this is, again, just one example, but indeed, yes, we have a very different strategy. We have, I guess, if I may say, a very different business model. I'm not saying one is better than the other, it's just a very different, we are a publicly funded public university, so many of the things you do at NYU, we couldn't do anywhere for political reasons, I guess. So maybe that's a first.
Thank you. Michael, perhaps we can proceed with you. There has been a long-term project called International Summer School of Design, and this is something like a core for the new ideas which are emerging now and which we are working on. Can you tell us a little bit about the way you approach this sketch of a graduate school outside Europe, and how you integrate all the knowledges and the personal knowledges of your faculty in this project?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I can remember, we were one of the maybe very early design schools who entered China. This was around 2001 or 2002. And me and my colleagues had a very distinctive experience. We were entering a classroom with young Chinese designers, and they were designing something, and the teacher was from Germany, and they had to design a bus stop. And at the end, all bus stops, all solutions looked like they were in Berlin. And then we thought that this could not be the aim for an international relation between China and Switzerland. And then the idea came up that we, rather than shuffling staff around the world, we said it's important that the students meet, that they really experience the other culture. And then the idea of this International Design Summer School started, where we were 1 year in China with around 15 Swiss students. Then Chinese students came to Switzerland, also around 15. And it was not only about conducting a project together, it was also about living together. So they had to host their colleagues from China. And so they lived for 2 weeks together. And then we saw that doing design or doing arts is much more than teaching something. So there were a lot of discussions about politics, about gender, about anything else between Switzerland and China. And last year we also integrated students from India. So this is now China, India, and Switzerland. And this was a little bit the core idea also what we trying to conduct in Shenzhen. So we said it's not about exporting a teaching model or a pedagogic model. It's more about enabling experience in a other culture, and trying to show via making something or designing something how we learn, how we solve our things. And I think at the end, that's what I hope at least, is that our staff, professors, researchers learn also a lot about how they solve the things there as we're doing it here. So that's a little bit what we are trying to approach there.
Sabine, you have experiences with the NYU. Since 3 or 4 years we are working together, and to come back to your presentation, can you tell us something about your impressions concerning the Wayside in Florence? You met students from New York there, and you were hosted by the site. And so perhaps we can come through this to your remark. And I'm still very interested in what you were telling about the demands of the departments create these sites. That was something you said. And perhaps we can link these questions with your experiences in Florence, for example.
Yeah, as much as I know, I don't think the department actually created Florence, because Florence is a unique story in itself. It was the Villa La Pieta was a very rich and famous art collector. I forgot his name, but up in the last century, and he donated basically his whole estate, which includes, I think, 5 villas and a huge park, to NYU, and with the, there was connected to his wish that they have to use it for educational purposes, right? And so here is a tremendous, huge gift, but also a huge task, because you can't just sell it, which would make you, a fortune. So they decided to build up a campus and also have art students who study art and art ecology, within the art collection, so they can do research there and build up their programs. But then in addition have a lot of like humanity and science classes there. And I think it's an incredible estate, and it was for us, it was like coming to Florence, and within Florence coming again to an American island in a way, because it is a gated campus. And for me, who has been living in New York for a while, it was just, well, I'm back at NYU, even though I'm in Florence. Because not only the colors and everything, but the whole way of like the classes are led and the students are, we got a very funny, I have to say this as being European, we got a very funny introduction into the campus because we had to attain everything the 18, 19-year-old students attain when they come first to the campus. And it was a rule for whoever visits or stays there for 2 weeks that we have to attain this. So we got taught of like how to behave in Italy and to be safe. And so this is how our introduction was. And of course, you know, we smiled and we understood, but also I understood why. You know, they have to have this, and we got all a little badge with NYU numbers on it in case we get lost and all these things. So, but the host, I mean, it was incredible to be there, and it was incredible to be able to work within our Building Bridges programs with different students from 5 different universities within this campus. We could use the site-specific campus, and we could also connect to those people who study there. And we got like an insight of what is possible in a different country, but yet we also got this sense of being very, you know, close in a way.
Oh, okay. So I think that a couple of things that are troubling about the NYU model have come up in conversation. And the first is, I think, the role of the faculty, which has been, you know, I started the talk by saying what's interesting about this model is the shifting role of the faculty. And if someone had come here who's had the word GNU after their name, I don't think that's where they would have started the talk, but that really has been the most controversial aspect of it. There were a series of no confidence votes in John Sexton, and while the confidence votes weren't stated around the GNU, they came out of a general sense that this huge project had been a slap in the face of faculty governance. That essentially the university was being, you know, remade. And there were a lot of people who had a lot of investment in particular away sites who saw these away sites now being taken up by this other administration. And it was really in the aftermath of these, I don't think it's a coincidence, it's really in the aftermath of these no confidence votes that we now have, you know, advisory committees for each site and you know, huge numbers of faculty who have had opportunities to teach in the sites, and a very kind of codified system whereby courses will be approved and sponsored, not just approved, but they are sponsored by faculty at NYU. So there's, you know, this is, I really do think it's both there are tremendous opportunities for faculty who really want to think about, you know, a international curriculum and how that can affect pedagogy. I think there are some great opportunities, but you know, I'm totally, well, I'm also cynical about what happens the minute the faculty don't exert their control over a curriculum. Because at the end of the day, the faculty are the only one who really care about what happens in a classroom. And that, maybe I'll include the students into that group, but certainly the faculty are the ones who really care about what happens in a classroom. And that, you know, I identify first and foremost as a faculty member, so you know, that's where my perspective is. The NYU bubble, you know, NYU provides students with, even when they're away, they have access to counseling, They have to have access to, gym facilities. So there's a whole kind of American university experience that the university is working very hard to reproduce in the different sites. And as I said, once you start thinking about the experience of going abroad as being part of a network, then it has to be seamless. The movement has to be seamless. The travel comes from, travail, something that is a pain, right? I mean, travel is supposed to, it's an instrument of torture. Travel should be unpleasant at a certain level. There's something, about the difficulty of relocation that makes travel valuable. So, if your goal is to have 20% of your students studying abroad in any given semester, you have to make that transition as easy as possible, and something gets lost as a result. It's definitely a kind of a give and take. So, yeah. Having said that, the university is adamant that the students will be receiving an immersive experience. And they emphasize the fact that everyone, here's the thing though, you don't have to know the language of the country you're going to. You don't need to have studied it for a day. Every site will be available to you whether or not you speak a word of the language of the host country. Once you're there, you are required to study that language, but you don't need to continue that language, right? So we could produce a bunch of students who have, remedial ability in 5 different languages, but never develop, competency. So while NYU likes to tout that, now I'm talking like I'm not employed by the university. So while my university likes to emphasize how these will be immersive experiences, the whole idea, an immersive experience, how immersive can it be if it's 6 months long and if it's one of multiple experiences? That's also a consideration.
Yeah, thank you. That we didn't have the aim to be provocative, but it was like, no, it was kind of an experience, and we have to talk about the way we are realizing what's going on. I'm very fascinated by this huge project of GNU, that's Global Network University. I think till last year it was called Global NYU, and now it's called GNU, or is it always?
It's always been the Global
Network. I see, yeah. But I mean, as you said, what interests me very much is how is this what you said, becoming engaged with a country, with a different country, how that works and how that influences the curricula also. You were talking about the problems of exporting curriculums to other countries. I think the special demand which we are confronted with is how can our curricula change through this confrontation, through this encounters we create through going abroad. So, Jörg, the technical university is something different than the Zurich University of the Arts. That's simple and that's obvious. But what I also find crucial is the discussion, are there differences between, say, the hard sides of education like technique, sciences, natural sciences, things like that, and the arts? I mean, obviously there are differences, but coming back to your words about global ETH, how are these engagements abroad connected to the countries or the cities, the sites where you work in this global sense?
Very good question, obviously, and I think one has to look back a little bit in history, and you know, when ETH was founded 1855, it wasn't a university, it was a polytechnicum, and basically what we had to do back then is build the infrastructure of Switzerland, so the railway system, and that's why we are an engineering school still today. Now it's obviously also about natural sciences and architecture and so on. And I think, yes, there is absolutely a big difference between culture, arts, and philosophy, if you want, and engineering or architecture or natural sciences, physics, for example. And it does influence our strategy big time. So ETH really is a school. So today, maybe the task we are given by the Swiss government, who pays 2/3 of our budget, is to educate future leaders in those fields. And what is a future leader, or what are the skills a future leader has to actually, you know, have? For example, a company like Nestlé or some other big corporates, which work closely together with ETH in many fields, they tell us, look, we need engineers, and you have to educate them, but we need engineers who are able to build up a factory, for example, in East Africa. Okay, we want Swiss engineers, Swiss engineering quality, but we need those people to be able to go to a very different environment, different culture, and be able to set up or build up a factory. And that adds a different dimension. So we are actually very keen on exposing our students at ETH to the global environment. And we encourage them a lot to spend time abroad in different cultural settings or environments. But that doesn't mean that we, at least until today, offer them well, the classical offshore campus in those areas. And then, you know, if you do physics, for example, or engineering, it really doesn't matter to some degree where you do it. It's still the same mathematical foundations. They can be taught here in Switzerland, they can be taught in Saudi Arabia or whatever. But what is important and what makes it maybe a bit different also, or difficult also for ETH in terms of MOOCs. We haven't heard the word, but you refer to online learning. It's, you know, our people at ETH, if you do engineering, if you do physics, if you do chemistry, you need to do a lot of practical work, which requires a lot of infrastructure. And it's not, I really can't, you know, talk about theater or you know, movies or whatever. You can maybe do this anywhere or not, I don't know. But certainly fields like physics or engineering needs a lot of equipment and space, and you know, this can not be replaced by MOOCs, for example, online learning. And I think in many of these globalization endeavors of the different universities, MOOCs and online learning plays a major role, because it's easy to, you know, you can actually listen to a lecture in Abu Dhabi taking place in New York. So that's easy to do. But it's easy to, not equally easy to do a practica in physics, for example, it just requires a very different approach. Yeah, so we have been very careful in how we approach this exposing young people, students to the different cultural environments. We encourage them to spend time abroad, and in order to achieve that, we simply partner with universities which we know offer a good education, and so far that works well. But I think there's major differences in terms of the fields you're
yeah, sure.
teaching.
I mean, that's part of the question. You were talking about different programs of the NYU, and I will ask you later how different it is to build up a program in drama or in engineering. I think it's very different, and the demands are very different. And like Michael, how is it in design? You said some time ago that the design is also something like a global language. Is it right?
Yes and no. So at one side, we all have we all need or have the dream of this globalized culture of things. So, for example, Apple or Nike or all this stuff is available everywhere on the world, produced somewhere on the world, which we don't know really under which circumstances and so on. But it coins our distinction of the global culture, all these multinational or globalized companies. And at the other side, and I think that's very interesting, at least for us, is this need for or the dream of this very specific, very regionalized, localized culture where something is produced and is needed and is also sold, and I think that's what we're trying to get a relation for, that our students go to this China where they have a picture of it, but it's never that what they expected when they are there, and then they are immediately confronted with Chinese students, and they have a mother, they have a father, they have sisters, and they're telling them how they live, what are the circumstances, and then they get a picture of this globalized impression of design culture, and this very localized. And we trying to give them tasks like one year we made it was a cooking, eating, drinking, something like that. So something everyone is doing on the world, and they had to explain how they cook, what are the instruments they need for cooking, what are the vegetables they eat, and so on. And then about that, and they had to design something for that. About that, they began to negotiate culture. And I think that's the point where ours or they learn together. That's very interesting. They beginning to explore and make experiments how they can solve this problem together, because they come from a total different end of, for example, eating culture. And then suddenly something new appears, which is very impressive. Very often it's not European, it's not Asian, it's something in between. And even if they do not understand everything they do, they learn from seeing, from experiencing. And we have one sentence which I think it's very true. This was always we said it's inspiration through irritation, and this often happens in our project. You do not understand, but you get something out of it.
Sabine, last question before we open the discussion to the public. You have studied in New York. Film is perhaps also kind of film directing, kind of international language, or I don't know. But what would you say concerning art education and globalization? What issues, what demands are connected to this aim to become globalized concerning the arts?
I think it goes to the direction also what Michael just said. I think as simple as it sounds, of course I discovered in New York that I was a European. I didn't really know it before to such an extent, because then I realized that I do have a cultural background and ethics and also artistic methods which are very different than they are in America, or as I experienced in New York. And I think because I already studied at the University of Arts in Lucerne before, I knew sort of like I was already on my way. I knew what my own strengths in a way were, even though I didn't really before, but when I was there I realized. And then I think I was able to see what the other approach, artistic approach is, and to incorporate that into my own work, which definitely, as you said, then brought me to a different state than it would have if I would have stayed here. For sure. And also, again, I realized how much, to what extent, actually, when I came back, that I had very, that are enlarged in a way, ways of doing things. And I think that is very interesting when we come back to you. This is also what I experience within the Building Bridges project, that from these very different parts, students are maybe in their second or third year, so they already have developed an own artistic view or approach, and then they meet, and then they share, and then they go on. And for me, it would be interesting to know, because I think if you, do they know actually when they go from one away side to the other, or depending of where the portal is, are they able to develop something which they know this is very specific within my field, connected to this basically home, whatever, home university before I go? Because I think there is a chance that, for example, the student I knew who studied at NYU acting, he was in Florence for half a year, and I asked him, what did you take out of it? And he said, as you said, well, I more or less I did humanity and science. So it wasn't really connected to his acting approach. It was like, I go half a year to Florence, I do all these courses I do have to do within my studies, so I don't have to do them in New York, and I do them somewhere else.
Will you answer, or shall we open the discussion to the audience? Yeah, I think so.
Maybe there'll be an opportunity to address that.
Okay, so it's your turn. Questions? There's a microphone. No, but the other ones will be able to.
Thank you. So, I hear all that talk of globalization, which has for sure its advantages and disadvantages. Now, food was mentioned. Okay, now let's look at the globalization of food. The tendency is not necessarily for the quality to prevail. I'll just say one word to exemplify that: McDonald's. Or Nestle, another good example. I personally am afraid of that. What is done what is done in that aspect? What are the thoughts in that aspect developing this project?
Yeah, I think so. For a U.S. person traveling through the world, the obvious attraction of chain restaurants is that they don't have to try something new. And that, of course, is the danger of a curriculum that tries to structure itself so that one can move seamlessly through a network. It will soften the bumps. To the extent that the host culture, one loses sight of the host culture because so much of the host culture is abrasive to the new person, right? And we want to ease ourselves through that abrasive quality. The other thing, though, is that if circulation is the goal, as opposed to the thing that brought you to that site, then you have no reason to search out the abrasive experiences. So, when I was in Madrid, I spent a year in Madrid, mostly because my wife is in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, and she wanted to go to Madrid, and it was my sabbatical, so we went to Madrid. But I was taking classes at the site, And, you know, in my language classes, they'd ask us, well, what did you do this weekend? And someone would say, well, I flew to Paris, or I flew to Stockholm. You know, the kids were going to Spain to be in Europe. They weren't going to be in, not even Europe, they were the whole hemisphere. I mean, they were there to experience, and you know, who can blame them? The airfare is cheap, and this was their opportunity to have a really wonderful weekend in, you know, Berlin or wherever they were headed. And I was the only one who was like, oh, well, I went to Asturias, or I went, you know what I mean? I was the one, and I didn't have, I hadn't, and I was only there because I was you know, because my wife and children were there. I didn't have a particular research interest to take me to Spain. But since I was there, I was going to find out about Spain. So this is my other concern about a network is if the circulation becomes the objective, if you lose sight of what is specific about the site and you emphasize the ease of circulation, then the people who travel those routes really won't have a compelling reason to engage the local. I mean, the university talks about all of the opportunities to engage the local and how that's really the objective. But if you make it like a McDonald's, there's, to use your analogy, there's no reason to engage the local. If you haven't chosen to go there to do that. It is you know, in many ways it goes to the very problems of the American character and of American culture. And so in many ways this is a pedagogical model that seems to embody both what America does well and does well on occasion, unfortunately.
I was very fascinated about the new system of ethical responsibility you mentioned in your talk. And I was wondering, how do you negotiate these questions with your partners? Because it's not an easy thing to do, I think.
So there's a huge controversy going on right now because on the top of the fold of the New York Times on the front page, there was an expose of labor conditions among the workers that built, you know, NYU Saadiyat Island. And the university, under pressure from the faculty, had set certain, you know, benchmarks for what the conditions would be, and they hired an outside party to oversee, and so on and so forth. And according to the NYU according to the New York Times, you know, this structure was not successful in preventing what everyone in this room would consider egregious labor conditions. So the question then becomes, well, what's my response as a faculty member? There were a lot of faculty members who really condemned the whole project. You know, there's been a lot. I'm on all of the forums, and believe me, there are dozens of lists that have taken up this subject, and there were a lot of people who just condemned the whole project outright, and saw this as, you know, evidence of the lack of faculty governance throughout this globalized university, that faculty are simply in the state of these laborers and so on. There were similarly a group of faculty from NYU Abu Dhabi that published an open letter in the Chronicle of Higher Education, where they really took it as an opportunity to talk about the academic freedoms that are available to them at NYU Abu Dhabi, and then the response was, well, why is, and this I think is totally appropriate, another faculty member who's a very big gun in Middle Eastern studies, and I won't mention his name, but wrote in to say, well, why is that the appropriate response? So it's, you know, it's really fraught because on the one hand, you know, I taught in NYU Abu Dhabi, and I had kids in my class who no question would not have had access to an American-style education were it not for that. institution. Women, some women from wealthy families, but who would never been allowed to leave the Emirates. And they were in a co-educational environment where they were, in my class, having to, read stuff about gay performance artists and, so on and so forth. And I think, it's work. It's work for them, and it's valuable work. It was super valuable for me and some of the Europeans and the Americans in the room to hear a student say, in response to a particular Arab play, I don't think a second wife would speak that way. And when asked why, she said, well, because my mom's a second wife, and she would never talk to the first wife in those kinds of terms about sex. And, and for me, that was really kind of like, wow, here I've taught this play before, and I've never actually sat down and talked to someone who comes out of a household that's being described in this play. So it's, there's all kinds of value that's being generated. It's a kind of day-by-day question of where, as a faculty member, your ethical responsibilities lie when bad things are done in the institution you're a part of.
Sorry, thank you very much for your impressive and revealing talk, Mr. Ziter. I have a question for you too, or maybe we can open it too. Your examples you started with came from the Abu Dhabi campus and particular needs for technology exchange and with little impact from the local cultures. And I understand, as Dr. Brunschwiller said, you go to Africa to find the bamboo which grows there and you try to build with it there, and you don't necessarily export Swiss bamboo because it doesn't exist there or whatever, maybe the idea. But since we're an University of the Art and Art School, I was wondering, would you emphasize an artist, a global artist, and in order not to become an imperial distribution of US arts to the world, what's the impact of the local cultures to the curricula, depending on where it is? Just one example, last year I met a student from Shanghai who wanted to go, and I helped her actually to apply at New York University Tisch School, but she wanted to go there to see the complete difference from what she experienced at Shanghai. So is the inverse something you emphasize in your curricula? Find practical examples, maybe you can mention a couple?
Well, so the curriculum in New York is very much grounded in New York theater practice. Our Meisner studio used to be called the Meisner Extension because Sandy Meisner, who was still living in New York at the time, gave us permission to use his name because our faculty were people he had trained. We have relationships to the Stella Adler Conservatory, to the Lee Strasberg. There's nothing more American than the Lee Strasberg and the method. Our students study there, and in terms of the coursework, we offer a lot of work about New York City theatrical practice. And the question really is, can we be similarly grounded in these away sites? And I actually think that if it's going to happen in theater. Because theater is so labor intensive, it's so, obviously it's an entirely bodily art form. You have to be entirely present for it. And so much of it has to take place, so much of the preparation has to take place outside of the classroom. I can't imagine someone going and enrolling in an acting program and leaving on the weekends, right? The way people tend to do in other away sites. So I think that, I think that there's greater hope for an acting curriculum to have the students engage all the abrasive qualities of being in a different culture. Having said that, we're not going to have our students go and work in existing conservatories precisely because of the cultural difference. Because these students do not have an experience of being in classrooms with faculty that will criticize them, you know, who will say, that's wrong, or get the hell out of my room. You know, if you're going to show me work like that, go away. As chair, I read everybody's evaluations. And it's the other thing. I don't think that happens everywhere else, where every faculty member has to be evaluated by their students, and then the faculty is required to respond in writing to the student critiques. I mean, so there's a level of attentiveness to how the student is experiencing you that, you know, is part of our system. But I constantly seek techniques like, you know, the faculty member uses the word don't instead of telling me what I can do. And I actually, and this is part of my training, see that as a problem. And I will talk to the studio head and say, you know, let's really think about what kind of notes this person is giving, and can you talk to them about what kind of notes will allow this student to expand and grow as opposed to shut down. And so, you know, we're going to create acting programs with faculty from the sites where, you know, engaged in the practices of those sites. But we're going to have to shape it into a program that is, you know, that's similar in the same way that you had to go through all that, like, debriefing before, as a faculty member, before you could walk onto the campus. The reason we have site directors who are there, along with, you know, counseling services and all this, is because we are going to try to create educational environments that are consistent with the pedagogy and the mission that we've established in New York.
As you said before, so it all depends on the faculty and whether they are actually willing to teach in away sites. Because to hold this standard you're talking about, they have to know, what, you know, and as you said, there's a lot of like resistance also, isn't there?
Well, the faculty will be from the host culture. So, you know, I mean, if we wanted to train students in Kunqua, we would be hiring William Sun or someone William Sun, you know, suggested to us. There would be periodically, there would be opportunities for NYU faculty to go abroad and teach. And again, that's something that is, that's an opportunity that arose after the no confidence vote, or at least has been emphasized after the no confidence vote.
The issue of getting involved with the local culture, a question, because I have no idea what theater means in Abu Dhabi. Can you maybe tell us something about it? What is the local theater in Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, so Abu Dhabi is a unique example, because the truth of the matter is this was a project that the government of Abu Dhabi wanted to pursue, because they're trying to think through what to do in 50 years when the oil runs out. And they are trying to imagine themselves as not just a site for finance, real estate, and insurance, but as a site for, you know, intellectual, creative, and educational opportunities. This is, you know, this is part of their, along with tourism. So, you know, there was not, and nobody in New York ever thought of developing a program in Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi, the government of Abu Dhabi came to NYU and started the conversation by writing a check. No, there is no theater in Abu Dhabi. And the individual who is heading up the program there is actually very interested in, not just through Michael Chekhov's discussion of chakras, but is himself very much involved in Indian performance techniques. And his interest in going there to lead the theater program was really because of its proximity, I think, to India. And he takes his students to India. This is another thing. I mean, the kind of money that's available to the students in Abu Dhabi is just astounding. He takes the whole group of students for intensives in India for like 2-week, 3-week periods. There, it's quite the opposite. The mandate for the university is to build a theater audience. You have to remember, in Abu Dhabi, only 10 or 15% of the population are nationals. Abu Dhabi is a city that was built by and for expats. Given the size of the population, they don't need, 10 or 5. They don't need world-class cardiac clinics and world-class medical facilities. They serve the local population, but they couldn't just serve the national population. There wouldn't be enough people. So everything in Abu Dhabi is being used, and services and expat community. Not only does the expat community build it, but they are the principal consumers for this. And it's only through the consumption of the expat community that there can be these services for the native the citizens of that country. And the same thing goes for theater. Theater in Abu Dhabi is going to be created and consumed by expats with periodic attendance by locals.
As you know, I lived in Dubai, which is a neighboring emirate, for 3 years almost, with a similar assignment to what you were trying to do, but from the other side, I was consulting the government of Dubai and setting up an authority for culture and arts. And my experience was that, face value, I would totally agree with what you're saying. There is certainly a very tangible drive from the international community, this, let's say, rather cosmopolitan fabric of people from all walks of life coming to this area for making business there, settling, maybe even creating families, etc. But on the other hand, there is another layer of these 10–15% of people, which is not so easy to access, as you probably know. And at the same time, maybe particular also endangered in this kind of furor of globalization, which is happening in the Emirates in particular. So I wonder how much it is really able to use also institutions like yours to discover that there is maybe more than just that. For example, in Dubai, you don't need actually to go from Abu Dhabi to India to explore theater. You would find it indeed already in Dubai. Because it took me almost a year, and I have to say I was embedded in a totally Emirati environment. All my employees were actually locals, and even they didn't know that there is a theater scene in Dubai. And the theater scene is actually rather oppressed because of the fact that it is a socially critical theater, decoded by people who within the community of Emiratis use theater for political and social criticism. So this is the reason why it's not part of the established calendars of cultural programs, but however it exists. And it's actually, if you go there, you would find out that they're actually quite interesting writers and performers. And I must say, coming from a former communist country, that it rang a bell when I saw some of those shows where people were sitting together in a theater. On a stage, there was a show happening, allegedly just trying to tell a story about something historical, but at the same time, there's very strong meaning about a contemporary social issue, which has been dealt with on stage, and people would understand immediately. So one of the strengths of theater is its ephemeral character, which does not really set in stone expressions. So I think that many things what you can find in this region where freedom of expression is not available is that many disciplines of the arts do not allow to really be freely developed and allow artists to express themselves also freely. But theater is different, because theater is a more ephemeral art. So therefore, like in former communist countries where theater very often has been used for social and political criticism, you would find actually similar phenomena also in this part of the world. And I have to say, it took me some time, but it turned out that, at least in Dubai, there's quite a vibrant scene of local theater. But it is something which is going on behind the scene. You wouldn't find any foreigners there. And it's not even spread among the Emiratis. But it is something very strong, local, and obviously even with a certain historic tradition in the meantime.
And I would just briefly add into that there's other types of performances that happen in the Emirates within the different immigrant, classes. So, and I know this because one of the theater faculty took her student to Dubai because the Pakistani workers on a particular night would have bare-knuckled fistfights. And they would just be, different rounds, different individuals, and then it was happening next to the fish market, and everyone would have fish. And so she took her class there to, watch the fights. And they got very friendly with this community, and they, they all went and had dinner afterwards, and now it's become something she does with the students periodically. So in a place like the Emirates, the idea of what constitutes the local culture where, in the Emirates, you can get a 99-year visa. You can get a visa that is good for 99 years. You're never going to be a national, but if you own enough property, you can pretty much stay. So this idea of what constitutes the nation is a much more kind of complicated question in some of these Gulf countries. And what constitutes the local culture is a little more complicated. I mean, what constitutes local culture is always a complicated question. In the case of the United States, does it have to be, Navajos? I mean, what is that the local culture? Just to say yes, you're absolutely right. There are interesting performances that can be engaged.
Just one more remark, because I think that is really different from your other so-called portal in Shanghai. The probably weakest part, or let's say the weakest element of this kind of global culture is actually the local one in Abu Dhabi. The majority of people living in Abu Dhabi are coming from India, a culture existing already for 4,000 or 5,000 years. The rest comes from countries like China, Africa, or Europe. Most of these people really carry their own identity wherever they go and feel actually very certain about where they come from, where they go to. It's with these nomads with almost no whatsoever cultural history, and at the same time, an enormous wealth having been created over a very short period of time, a completely different story.
Okay, we should come to an end now. Is there one last question? Okay.
Perhaps I date myself a bit, but there used to be a concern about brain drain, that one would move the best and the brightest from one part of the world to another part of the world, educate them, but they wouldn't go back into the local communities. Do you think, because I haven't heard that term in the last 10 years, that globalization has been able to stop that, or is that still a risk?
Maybe I'll take that question at least to start with. But indeed, there's a discussion about brain drain. Now, from our perspective, Zurich, we don't see this as a big issue. So what we essentially try to do and I think many other university in the Western Hemisphere, or the Northern Hemisphere at least, is trying to attract. So everybody wants to be excellent. Let's start with this. Everybody wants to be excellent. Everybody, also NYU, wants to have excellent faculty, excellent students, independent of where on what campus, in what part of the world that is. So what we are interested in at ZHdK is to bring excellent people to Zurich, basically. How do you achieve this? When we ask professors, we recruit professors mostly from the US and UK, maybe less from the areas we were just discussing. Why do you choose ETH? And they would say, because we have access to great students. That's the #1 argument. When you ask a student, why do you choose ZHdK, not a Swiss student, but somebody from abroad, they would say, because you have excellent faculty. So it's a chicken and egg question. What is first? We don't know. But as a matter of fact, it's really about from when we say, why do we, I mean, we haven't really discussed this, the question, why does an institution like ZHdK or NYU have a certain global strategy? What do you want to achieve? I mean, you alluded to some sorts, but there's many other factors. So we really want to, with all we do in terms of going global or becoming more international, although that's actually a difficult one for ZHdK because we are a very international school from the beginning. So just to give you a number, it's more than 70% of our faculty are non-Swiss. That has been the case mostly from the beginning. At the PhD level, 67% of the students are non-Swiss. So we don't have a need to diversify our faculty or students. But still, we want to be visible globally, mainly because, you know, if you ask a Chinese student, the excellent Chinese student, what institutions would you choose, you know, they go by the rankings purely, at least in the beginning. And if you're not, you know, in the top 20, let's say, then you're just not attractive. Be that good or bad, you know, it's just a fact. So I think we need to be visible, and our aim and our concern is, at least what we see, is not that we lose. There's not from Switzerland at least, there's not a brain drain. We do attract a lot of people from other countries, excellent people, and for them, of course, that's a major concern. So we have to think about how can we actually give back, if I may use that word, to you know, let's say the African continent. If we attract good students, educate them here, is it, you know, how can we assure that at least a certain percentage of these people go back to Africa or Asia? Is this the task of the university? It's really difficult to answer because primarily we are, you know, we have to educate people and it's then their decision to go back or not. I think the US is a very good example, and you have much more experience. Many people coming into US, many leaving the US, but not all of them. And there's certainly, it depends on the higher education system you have and also the size of the country. But it's a very valid question and concern. It is something which needs to be addressed. Maybe you want to add something?
I would just say I think it is evidence of the triumph of the neoliberal mindset that no one talks about in the US papers, at least no one talks about the brain drain. We talk about the problem of the fact that all the Indian engineers are returning to create Indian startups in India. I think you're right that has fallen out of the vocabulary, but I think it's more because of Bush and Reagan and Thatcher than because it ceased to be a problem.
Okay. So far, thank you. Okay, I think there's a lot of questions we didn't raise now, especially the question about the motives of the faculty. You didn't answer quite right. So yeah, but we can discuss this later. I'm very interested in that question. There should be something which is very demanding to say it's a necessity to go abroad and to not to bring my knowledge abroad, but to get knowledge back from backgrounds and from circumstances I don't know yet. And we have to answer this question, why do we need that? And another question is really like what you said, globalization takes place, we don't have to talk about that, but what forces us to be part of that? There's also always discussions about isn't our culture a very important part of the global world or society? Things like that. We have to discuss this, and we have the opportunity to do that from 8 o'clock on in the panorama with a little something to eat. It's 8 o'clock now. So we have to stop now because there's a next lecture waiting outside. No. Yeah, and you are all invited to come to the panorama, have something to eat and to drink to deepen the discussion with you and to become a little bit more controversial also. I mean, we're also always kind of, it's interesting to talk to each other, but probably that would have been my part. I wasn't so good. Okay, thank you very much.